So, what I'd like to talk about today is my understanding of suffering and discipline, what our practice says about suffering and discipline. I guess ultimately it's my understanding of suffering and discipline as I'm informed by my practice. So, this came to me as a subject just recently. About 2 weeks ago, I was reading a piece that came across in some of the newsletters. It kind of a very foraging sort of imagination. I have a lot of newsletters that I tap into on occasion. I don't read all of them every day or every week, but they're on all sorts of topics, science and psychology and culture and literature and geopolitics and all sorts of things. And that's just the way my mind works. Is I really enjoy, foraging through things. Sometimes they're Dharma, explicitly Dharma, but I don't really gravitate towards explicitly Dharma, Buddhist Dharma or Zen Dharma anymore. When I prepare for my talks, I do. I'll dig back in, and in koan practice, I do. But I've got kind of a wide range, and what came across a few weeks ago was some writings by the German activist and philosopher Simone Weil. And she said some things about suffering and discipline that really resonated with me and got me thinking. So I'm going to share a little bit at the beginning here. And she's incredibly well regarded. I don't know if anyone is familiar with her work, but she died very young, I think 34, 35 years old, of tuberculosis. But prior to that, for about, from age 20 to age 34 or so, she was a brilliant writer. She electively chose to leave a teaching position and go to work with automobile manufacturers to understand what the, working life was all about. And she became very intimate with manual labor. And I would say, what's really important in life. So she said, and then she died of tuberculosis, which was very painful, a very painful death. So one thing she wrote in her late writings, like just a few months before she died, she said, the way to make use of physical pain, when suffering, no matter what degree of pain, when almost the entire soul is inwardly crying, make it stop, I can't bear it anymore. A part of the soul, even though it might be a very small part, should say, I consent that this should continue throughout the whole of time if the divine wisdom so ordains it. The soul is then split in two. For the physically sentient part of the soul is at least sometimes unable to consent to pain. The splitting in two of the soul is a second pain, a spiritual one. And even sharper than the physical pain that causes it. So she's actually recommending this split in consciousness that creates an even deeper physical pain, or an even deeper spiritual pain. Then she goes on, a similar use can be made of hunger, fatigue, fear, and of everything that imperatively constrains the sentient part of the soul to cry, I can't bear it anymore, make it stop. There should be something in us that answers, I consent that it should continue up until the moment of death, or that it should not even finish then, but continue forever. Then it is that the soul is as if divided by a two-edged sword. To make use in this way of the sufferings that chance inflicts upon us is better than inflicting discipline upon oneself. Now, the first part of this, accepting the suffering wholeheartedly is something that I've come to see is right at the heart of our Zen practice. And this final part where she said it's actually better than even inflicting discipline really got me thinking, because we're a very disciplined practice. Buddhism Zen especially requires a great discipline. And I've talked about discipline before. This put it in a different, not different, but a broader perspective, this question of discipline with respect to suffering. So I'll say this right off. Are you willing to suffer? Your willingness to suffer is basically the essence of Buddhist practice, as far as I understand it. If you're not willing to suffer, then you're not going to change. You're not going to grow. You're not going to grow in wisdom or compassion, which is what we are all wanting out of our spiritual practice. So it's the non-negotiable in practice, your willingness to suffer. It's not me that's making it non-negotiable. It's your practice that's making it non-negotiable. Okay? We all have a relationship with our practice. So I often say, what you support your practice and it will support you. You know, I also say everything you give to your practice, it will give you back 1,000-fold. So there is an exchange, a relationship you have with your practice. But this is non-negotiable. If you're not willing to suffer, then you don't have a relationship with your practice. Because the practice itself requires a certain amount of suffering. It actually imposes a certain amount of suffering on you. if you accept it. So this question of, you know, how we're motivated, are we motivated by suffering? Are we motivated by a certain discipline that we've created for ourselves? Ultimately, I think our motivation to be disciplined comes, in fact, from some prior suffering. I was really intrigued by these writings that I had read by Simone Weil, and I happened to go out to lunch with an old friend a few days ago, and he's a very accomplished individual, and he's very disciplined. He's built houses by himself. He's started businesses by himself. He's been very financially successful with a certain disciplined investment strategy. He's lived all over the world. He's raised 2 children. He's been very accomplished in all these many ways. He's fixed up and remodeled this old sports car, and, you know, all of these things that I was like, holy cow, he just blows me away. I felt so, you know, a little bit less than, you know, as I talked with my friend. This is a friend that I actually knew when I was 7 years old. I knew from ages 7 to 12 in Connecticut before he moved with his family up to Vermont, and then I didn't see him again until about 2 years ago. He happens to live in Bozeman, and we reconnected after 45 plus years apart, reconnected. And, you know, so even then it's like, here's my friend who I went to 3rd grade with, and I see all the things that he's accomplished in his life, and I kind of I haven't built a car, I haven't started these businesses. I had some comparison going on with him. But I have a lot of respect for his discipline. So I asked him, where does your discipline come from? And his answer surprised me. He said he went right to talking about his childhood and how he didn't get attention from his parents, and that he learned at a very early age that he had to do things in order to get basically the attention and love that he felt he was lacking from his parents. I didn't expect that at all. I expected he would say, well, I realized that you have to do things in a structured way in order to learn how to do them and accomplish, which is true. But he had such a deep insight into like where it was sourced within himself, that he actually ended up saying to me after describing, how it transpired, how his life transpired. And he said, I was willing to suffer to get what I needed to get that attention. So he explicitly, I didn't bring up suffering at all. I just asked him about discipline. So he was willing to impose a discipline upon himself, which required a certain amount of suffering, right? Like he said, I was willing to suffer in order to get what I want. So in this way, the suffering and the discipline, they're the same. They're the same when we're conscious of it. So when Simone Weil says to make use in this way of suffering, to really accept it wholeheartedly, the sufferings that chance inflicts upon us is better than inflicting discipline upon oneself. So we have some models of, it kind of touches on discipline and suffering in one of our koans, and I had some fun with this, so I want to share this with you. This is a koan actually that Gakyo had as her main koan for her Shusa ceremony a little over a year ago, and so some of you have heard talks on this, and I've heard the koan before, and I want to share some new perspectives. Those of you who are here for the first time, there's some nice material in here as well. It's not complicated. So the koan goes like this. A non-Buddhist came to the Buddha and said, I don't ask for words, I don't ask for silence. Buddha just sat quietly. The non-Buddhist said admiringly, the compassion of the world honored one has opened the clouds of my illusion and has enabled me to enter on the way. Making his salutations, he departed. Ananda then asked Buddha, what was it that the non-Buddhist realized that he so praised you? The world honored one replied, a high-class horse moves at even the shadow of the whip. So we have some new people, so I'll just share the background of the shadow of the whip. The Buddha explains to Ananda, who is his cousin and student, that there's actually, I'm gonna read another version of this, and this explains it. It brings out this presentation in a even richer way. So these stories come to us from 2,500 years ago. So, who were these people? Who was it's called a non-Buddhist. There were barely Buddhists at the time, right? There weren't really Buddhists. What does that even mean? So this figure who's coming to the Buddha here is variously characterized as a philosopher, as a townsperson. We don't know really, right? In this story, so some of this is kind of an imaginative, fleshing out of how it could have been. A man came to the Buddha and said, I have come to hear what cannot be said. Buddha closed his eyes. Seeing Buddha close his eyes, the man sat down and closed his eyes. Ananda, Buddha's attendant and a constant companion, was sitting nearby. Ananda became alert that something was going on. He must have been napping. What to do? Just sitting and sitting. The Buddha and the man, the non-Buddhist, just sitting. He must have been yawning. Something was going on. This man had said that he came to listen to what couldn't be said. And Buddha closed his eyes and became silent, and then the man too sat down and closed his eyes. So Ananda's looking on. He feels something is transpiring, but no words are uttered from either side. He felt an invisible presence. The man got up after half an hour, tears flowing from his eyes. He bowed down at Buddha's feet, offered his greetings, and said, "Blessed am I. I was searching for just such a man who can say it without saying. And you have said it very beautifully. I leave fully satisfied. He left Buddha, shedding tears, deeply gratified. No sooner had he left, Ananda asked, "What was that? What happened? You neither said anything nor did he hear anything. And when he was leaving and he touched your feet, you blessed him with such overwhelming totality, putting your hand on his head in a way that you rarely do. What happened? What kind of man was he?" Buddha said, "Ananda, you know, when you were young, when we were all young, they were cousins. Buddha and Ananda they were cousins brought up in the same royal palace. They grew up together. So Buddha said, you loved horses very much. You know well that there are horses who stall even when you beat them. You go on whipping them and they just don't move. They're very stubborn. Then there are some horses who you whip a little and they move. And there are others who don't need whipping. Just the crack of the whip makes the sound without striking and they start galloping. And then there are others still, you know them well, for even the sound of the whip feels like an insult, just the shadow, and they gallop. This man was one of the last kind, the shadow of the whip. I didn't say anything to him. I just dived into nothingness. He got a glimpse of my shadow and awakened. Now he has the answers to the questions he's looking for. So that's quite a different and richer sort of scene, of this encounter. And there's some parts of it that I find to be kind of interesting. Right. So I think this is really close to the truth. And the way our koans express things, they're so bare bones that we can sometimes lose some of the potential juice, in the encounter. So I think there's a lot of value in this. So these are these four types of horses, that are responding to his words. I want to share this image right here. So there's another presentation or visualization of what this non-Buddhist might have been like. I'm going to share the screen here. So there's a collection of that this fellow did, and he created a big colorful image for all of the koans in the Gateless Gate, the Mumonkan. And I've really liked a lot of them. I have it, and I check them out on occasion when I'm working with certain koans. And I want to share this one. Okay. So here's the non-Buddhist. I hope everybody can see it. He's kind of a ruffian. He's got this sword. He's got a tattoo on his bicep of a dancing woman. It says Angie. His butt's sticking out. He's got this like gnarly looking pig with him. It looks like he's in a really bad mood. His camel is up here like chewing this cud. Looks a little like Scooby-Doo. He's got a couple of jugs up here. Imagine what's in there. And look how respectful he is. So, let's really see ourselves, as this person here, right? Don't make it about Buddhist and non-Buddhist, make it somebody who's really, you're just able to, is motivated to understand themselves at the deepest level. Mm-hmm. So this was a fellow who, who really responded from just the shadow of the whip. So what's the whip? I mean, the whip in a sense is the discipline, right? It's that which is, comes in and directs us. There's a form of suffering, involved in that, or there can be. But really the essence, the bottom line that I want to convey is just how the full willingness to suffer, to embrace your suffering, is the key. Not to resist it. If you enter into practice in order to make difficult feelings go away, or be more comfortable, be more spacious, be more blissed out, it's going to go sideways for you. And of course, we all have that desire. I mean, that's where the split comes in, that Simone Weil talked about. There always will be that part of us that resists pain, that is uncomfortable, that doesn't want that. It immediately goes to, I can't take this. But it's the condition of being human: loss, pain, death, illness. That's the non-negotiable conditions of being human. So we can meet these with resistance and manipulation and contrivance and avoidance, or we can embrace them. And here's how it works. If you resist your suffering, you will have more suffering. If you embrace your suffering, you become liberated from suffering. Becoming liberated from suffering doesn't mean the suffering goes away, because life is suffering, the first noble truth. Liberation from suffering is something different. So if you resist suffering, you don't accept suffering, then your suffering will increase. Unequivocally. If you embrace your suffering, then you'll be liberated. So that's for you to explore in your life. What does that mean? What does that mean? There's that within us which resists the suffering, like I was saying, but there's also that within us which knows the path to liberation. It actually knows this spiritual truth, that as we embrace it, we become it and we grow from it. So to do this consciously is our path. Yeah, I think Nietzsche has a line. It's in Thus Spake Zarathustra in his books, and he says, it's in the chapter on redemption, and it says, to turn every thus it was into thus I willed it, that is redemption. Daido Roshi Lori, remember him saying and writing, what happens to you and who you are the same. And when you can see that, that's liberation. What happens to you and what you do, what happens to you and what you do are the same. So I see that as the same as what Nietzsche said. Fully embrace fully embrace what happens to you, fully embrace your condition, fully embrace your state, even to the point, I mean, Simone Weil goes really far. I'm going to imagine this happening forever, even beyond this life. That sounds to me like the Bodhisattva vows, right? Sentient beings are numberless. I vow to receive them. It's that infinite task throughout time and space. That type of surrender to your condition, to your pain. And you'll see that when you do that in your life, it transforms. It does change, it does shift. Whatever struggles that you have with family and relationship and job and the fears that are triggered within yourself and the anxiety that's triggered and the loneliness, the struggle, the pain, whatever it is, these conditions that are yours and yours alone, you're the one who's experiencing them in one way where you're all very alone in our pain. Yeah, but it's a sacred aloneness. That's yours. Your pain is yours. Your suffering is yours, and that's the source of your growth. Yeah, that's the path to your true self, is to embrace that. And then in a way, with that level of acceptance, to have it, well, this can go on forever and beyond, even this lifetime, you become so whole in that, right? To not have to change it. All of the heart energy, all of the mental energy that's going into handling, yeah, or trying to change, that condition, is now suddenly available to you to do what you consciously want to do, move forward with. You carry that forward. It can even fuel you. It does fuel you. Your suffering can become a great motivation, a great source of energy and juice. That then cultivates the mind that responds to the shadow of the whip. That's where it comes from. This fellow, whether in the koan, whether he was a philosopher or a townsman or a ruffian, suffered. There's no doubt about it. Had to be able to do that, to be able to sit in silence with the Buddha, not receive anything overtly, and then recognize that that was the truth, to be in one's condition. And that's all that's needed. Okay, I've said enough, maybe too much.